This passage from Revelation 13, verses 1 through 4, paints a picture of a terrifying vision. A beast rising out of the sea with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns, with blasphemous names written on its heads. It resembles a leopard, but with the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. The dragon, symbolizing Satan, gives the beast its power, throne, and great authority. One of the beast's heads seems to have suffered a fatal wound, yet it miraculously heals, leaving the entire world in awe and leading them to follow the beast. This healing is so profound that it leads people to worship the dragon who empowered the beast and the beast itself, praising its unmatched strength and invincibility. Has this beast already been described and defined in the Old Testament scriptures? Let's find out. Welcome back, everyone, to our Revelation study. Today we start chapter 13, and we're going to go through verses 1 through 4. Why, you ask? Not the whole chapter? Well, Brother Ken's going to explain that to us. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Jimmy. I love how you give me the hard stuff here. Tell him, Ken.
Tell him.
But
Tell him.
yeah, no, I'm so thankful for the back end of all these videos that people don't get to see is Jimmy working with my schedule, and you're so gracious to do that. And no, things are just getting a little bit more busy for me. As many of you know, one of the things that I feel God's called me to is to become a hospice chaplain, to be able to minister to people at the end of their life and their families, and even the nurses around them and social workers. And that's just getting a little bit more busy. Just going to have to do more time and spending time with people and getting some schooling done. So we'll get done the videos, as we can. And so today I knew we could get through 4 verses. So we'll get through sometimes larger chunks than that. These are pretty in-depth 4 verses. So, but we'll take them in bite-sized pieces, as we have time.
Okay. Well, I looked at the PDF you sent me, and it looks like there's some really good groundwork you're about to lay for us.
Absolutely. Chapter 13 is a really fun chapter. I think they're fun. I enjoy studying them. And this is the chapter we're introduced to the famous beast of Revelation. In fact,
Okay.
There's 2 beasts in Revelation 13. When I hear people talk, sometimes they say, well, they think the Antichrist this, the Antichrist that, and things like that. And when I tell them that the word Antichrist is only mentioned in 1st and 2nd John, and it's referring to people that there were many in John's day in the 1st century, and they denied the teachings of Christ. That's why they were Antichrist. They denied that Jesus came, that was God in the flesh, and that his teachings were not followed. There were many, John says. And the typical response, Jimmy, is I have people say something like, well, the beast in Revelation is the Antichrist. And one of the questions I ask them, just to kind of prod them a little bit, to get them to think, is I say, which beast? Because most people that say that are repeating it because they've heard somebody else say that, and they don't realize that in chapter 13 we find 2 different beasts. So, anyway, this is not the Antichrist. We'll see that in a moment. We're going to see 2 different beasts in this chapter. One is going to be from the sea, and one is going to be from the land. And just as a quick recap, so where are we at? We're in Act 2 in this. And remember that the Act 2 is all about, now that Act 1 was about what Christ had accomplished and the victory that we have in Christ, and what he did to become king and to control the nations as his inheritance. Act 2 is, how do we fit into that? So now the focus then turns to the bride of Christ, which we saw in Revelation 12. At the beginning of Act 1, Scene 1, we see the bride of Christ is the woman that is now in a heavenly category. It's one of the wonders that we see in the heavens. And now we see this woman who is the faithful remnant. This is the faithful Israelites. These are the ones that are in covenant. This is the bride of Christ. This is her. And she is the one that actually then ends up delivering Christ, because Jesus comes through the faithful remnant. And then we see, of course, she is clothed with the Son. That's the presence of God. She's clothed with his presence. She on her head is crown of 12 stars. Of course, we remember that's symbolic of both the tribes and now the apostles too. And we see the moon, which was used for times and for seasons, are now subject to her. They're under her feet. Okay, so we see this beautiful, beautiful vision in chapter 12. And then we also saw that the dragon was kicked out of heaven and so forth. Now, here in chapter 13, we're going to see two different beasts. The first one we're going to see is going to be the sea beast. Now, Jimmy, this chapter will flow, especially the verses we're covering today, are going to flow so very easily if we just get four different metaphors in our minds. And that's what I want to go over at the beginning here is four different metaphors. And so let's go ahead and go to Revelation 13 and verse 1, and we'll take these in order. But remember, as we've said before, Revelation is written like an exclamation point after a sentence that's already been written. This is pointing backwards to things that we've already heard before. It's assumed at this point that you don't start your Bible reading in Revelation. It's assumed that you're reading the end of a story. And so, us coming to Revelation and not acknowledging what's already been said it's kind of like that annoying person you're watching a movie with and they haven't been paying attention. It's the person that's been talking to somebody else. They've been in the kitchen getting snacks or whatever, and they come in the very, they go, who's that? Okay, now who's that? Now, why did you say that? And you're going, please stop talking. And this is, we don't want to be that person. And in Revelation, you don't want to come in and, start assuming that you know the connections when you haven't been following it. So it's assumed that the reader here is familiar with the metaphors that have already been given. These are all pointing back to things we should be familiar with in the Old Testament. So let's go ahead and read verse 1, and we're going to get these metaphors in order. Revelation 13:1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea. There's two of our metaphors. We're going to look at sand. We're going to look at sea. I saw a beast. There's our third one. And this beast was rising up out of the sea. So we're going to look at three metaphors. The first one that we're going to look at is the sand. Jimmy, if you could help me out again today, that's such a help when you do that.
Yeah.
Genesis chapter 22, Genesis 22 and verse 17. If you could do that, I'll write on the board.
All right. That in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies.
So in Genesis chapter 22, the first part of our metaphor that we see is actually God's promise to Abraham is that his lineage would be kind of like the sand of the sea. So we actually have both the descendants of Abraham, and also we actually even see the word sea in that one also. But 32:12, if you don't mind, Genesis 32:12.
And thou saidst, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.
So here we have, once again, it is the line of Abraham that is considered the sand of the sea. So let's go ahead and move on. So our first metaphor is sand. A lot of times the word sand is referring to descendants. Okay, let's go to our second one, which is going to be the word sea, or even the word deep. Now this gets very interesting. So I'm going to put sea/deep. Now this metaphor is so strong, Jimmy, that this is actually found in Genesis 1. You'll notice these are all early references, but this is going to be Genesis chapter 1 and verse number 2, if you are okay reading that.
And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
Okay, so here at the very, very beginning of the story, we see multiple metaphors that are going to be carried over. These are thoughts that are being carried over all the way through the Bible. And remember, this is God communicating to his creation. This is God taking a word picture for us. This is an ancient document, and God is using very, very obvious imagery to teach his creatures, us, about himself. And so he creates a world. He creates a world, and when he starts off explaining it, it's unformed and unfilled. That's what that void is talking about there. It's just not complete yet. It doesn't indicate destruction. And when it's formless and void, it's unformed and unfilled. And Then we talk about him looking in his spirit moves over the face of the deep. This is so important. So whenever we're talking about God's spirit, we're talking about his animated presence, his breath, his wind, the ruach, pneuma, all the same word, spirit, breath, wind. And this is the light. Think of the spirit of God as the life force of God. And when his life force moves over the face of the deep, then things begin to happen out of the chaos of the water, out of the instability of the water, structure appears. So you have chaos, the water metaphor in the Bible, the deep especially, is like the highest form of chaos, instability. And this metaphor carries all the way through the Bible. You read it in the Psalms. In Psalm 69, you talk about I'm in the mire, I'm in the muck, I'm in the sea, I'm in the depths. It's always a metaphor for instability and wickedness and sin. The opposite of that is a rock, sturdy foundation. Jesus is my rock. And the imagery is when his spirit, when his animating force moves over, his life giving presence moves over this instability, dry land appears. The dry land is a result of his presence. And so if land is a result of his spirit, then higher land is even more so a picture of God's presence. So we have the mountain theme is formed right here in Genesis as well, where we know Ezekiel 28 indicates that Eden was a mountain, the mountains of God, Jerusalem, a city set on a hill, the law given at Mount Sinai, Jesus giving us his instructions on the Mount of Olives and so forth. We see this mountain theme where it's elevated the farthest possible place away from the chaotic water. So the metaphor here is given. Let's just do a few rapid fires here. Genesis 7:11.
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened.
So in the destruction of mankind, except for 8 people, it was that the Lord opened up the fountains of the abyss, of the deep. So this is quite literally in the Jewish culture and the Jewish theology and the Jewish mind is the destruction of the whole world is when the Lord allows or forces this access to the deep. If I allow the deep to come into your life, I'm essentially killing you. That's the way they thought of it. Deuteronomy 8:7.
For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills.
So one of the positive parts of the Lord delivering them into a good land is, if you notice from that, is you have the benefits of the depths, but the depth you don't have to go to the depths to get it. It's actually coming to the surface in a safe way. So you see, even his blessings is talking about there's a buffer between you and the depths, but you're going to have springs from the depths, but you're going to have them in a safe way where there's a land buffer. That's why a well is so attractive and so forth. Job chapter 38, verse 16.
Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth?
When God is trying to communicate to Job that Job doesn't know as much as he thought he did, and when God is trying to minister to Job to try and put him in a right standings with himself, one of the questions he had for him was, "Are you able to search out the depths? Have you gone on an expedition in the depths?" Of course, the answer is no. It was one of the ways God used the depths or the abyss as a way of putting Job in his place, because Job knew that was out of bounds for him. That was a place that he would never be able to search. And God used that to show Job that. Psalm 42 in verse 7.
Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of thy waterspouts. All thy waves and thy billows are gone over me.
And so here we see this metaphor then now is being used to show that God can use the deep to communicate with each other if he wants. So not only can we be destroyed by the deep, without God's presence, the deep will consume you. It's used to show Job that Job doesn't know what he's talking about because he can't even search the deep. But now we see that God has such power that he can use the deep calling on a deep. In other words, if you were in the middle of the ocean, you'd hear a crashing wave over here and you'd hear a crashing wave over here in stereo on either side of you. And the psalmist here is saying, who else could control the deep, where the deep calls to the deep and the deep is answering the deep? Like in other words, he can manipulate the abyss, he can manipulate the deep. And that was one of the ways the psalmist was trying to express that God has such power, where people are terrified of it, but God has control over these things. Now, the reason I'm going into such detail on this is because this word right here for the deep in Jewish theology was a place of evil spirits, a place of the unknown. There's all these kind of shades of this idea of just negative bad. And when we get into the Greek and we hear the word abyss, I want folks to understand this word deep right here, and the word abyss and the words bottomless pit are all the same word. So now let's start putting this together, because this is all the same word. So if you go to the bottomless pit, so Jimmy, if you don't mind reading Revelation 9:1.
And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit.
All right, and we've already studied the abyss and bottomless pit in Revelation 9:1. So this is the same word. So now, when we're talking about having the keys to the abyss, this should make more sense. The Spirit of God moved over the face of the deep, and dry land appeared. Stability out of chaos. That's the imagery of God's Spirit. And so here we see that this angel in Revelation 9, which we've already done a video on, is given a key to the deep, given a key to the abyss, the bottomless pit. And let's bring it home here one more. Revelation chapter 20 and verse 4.
And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years.
Okay, so we're talking here about the binding of Satan in Revelation 20, which is, by the way, the only place in the whole Bible this 1,000 years is mentioned in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 7. You'll see it a few times. But here we're talking about the binding of Satan in this bottomless pit idea, and this all ties together with the binding of Satan. It'll all come together when we get to that point of our study, and it will make more sense. There's one other place I want to go. In Jewish theology, this reference to the deep and the abyss was also the place of monsters, the place of wicked evilness. And it was this idea of the realm of Satan, really. And let's show one example of that. If you could go to Luke chapter 8 and verses 26 through 31.
And they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee. And when he went forth to land, there met him out of the city a certain man, which had devils long time, and wear no clothes, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For oftentimes it had caught him, and he was kept bound with chains and fetters, and he brake the bands, and was driven of the devil into the wilderness. And Jesus asked him, saying, What is thy name? And he said, Legion, because many devils were entered into him. And they besought him that he would not command them to go out into the deep.
So this is a story we're all familiar with. I want you to notice that this seemed to be an extreme case of demonic possession. It seemed to be a case of a legion, a high number, a multitude, if we will, of demons were in this one man. And they asked Jesus if he would be willing to not put them into the deep, the abyss, the bottomless pit. The idea of bottomless pit has the idea of stability. It would be like sinking. It would be, the bottomless pit idea would be like sinking with rocks in your pockets and trying to jump up in the middle of the water. I mean, when you're going down, imagine kicking to try and get stability in the middle of the water while you're sinking down. That's the imagery that we have of bottomless pit. It means in the water, chaos. In fact, for those who want to look into this, the Hebrew letter mem has a pictogram that looks like this. That's the pictogram. Of course, that probably looks familiar. It looks like our M, and it's the letter mem. And the pictogram is supposed to be water. So when you think of M, waves, that's in the Hebrew mind. And the meaning of this pictogram literally is talking about chaos. Oops, see, it cannot write and talk. Is chaos. So this pictogram right here with this idea of a wave is always chaos, and that's actually built into the Hebrew language. So it's very, very interesting there. So we've already talked about sand being the line of Abraham. We've talked about the sea or the deep or the abyss is the place of scary, evil, negative, bad, and no stability. Basically the opposite of a mountain, where there's something you can get out of the chaos. And the mountain theme, and that's why the mountain theme is prevalent throughout Scripture, of the presence of God. On the mountain theme, he always gets alone in a mountain to pray. But we're going through Matthew in our church right now, and I mean, good grief! I feel like the last several chapters, we're in chapter 15. I feel like the last several chapters, all Jesus has been trying to do is get to the mountain alone to pray, and things keep getting in his way. If it wasn't sad, it would be comical how often he tries to get alone in a mountain, and then all of a sudden, 15,000 people are up there waiting for him, and they needed help. He's like, oh, just let the guy pray in a mountain. It's just an interesting theme. Our next metaphor we need to go over to help understand this is the word beast, the metaphor of beast. And that is also found very early on in Scripture. Jimmy, if you don't mind, Genesis chapter 3 and verse 1.
Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden?
In verse 7.
And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons.
In verse 21.
Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skin and clothe them.
So here's some interesting thoughts when we get into the beast metaphor in Genesis. First is, you read in chapter 3 and verse number 1 that Satan was contrasted or compared to a beast of the field. Now, the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. So we're already putting into this category of beast. The theming is we're having a connection here with Satan. And then we learned that this is so vitally important that people get this. When Adam and Eve sinned against God, that is when they realized there was shame in being seen. There was shame in being naked. There was shame in being unclothed. And this is where our clothing or our robing metaphor and theming take over from Genesis 3, where Jesus is providing a covering, the Feast of Booths, a covering for you. And Jesus then covers the world with his blood and so forth. There's a robe given to the saints. They're given a white garment and so forth to get into the wedding. This theme is all the way back here. But very interestingly, they then decided to take things upon themselves, and they decided to cover themselves, but they did it with vegetation. They did it with the results of a plant or a tree. In this case, it was a fig leaf. They sewed together, and they tried to cover their shame, which is the result of their sin, through a fig leaf. This is exactly what Cain did. Cain was supposed to take an animal sacrifice, but he did it. He took a harvest sacrifice of vegetables and plant life and vegetation, and it was not pleasing to the Lord. Here's Adam and Eve basically did the same thing. They're trying to cover their own result of sin, their shame, their nakedness. They're uncovering before God. They did it with this non-biblical way, but it was much more clean to do it the way they did. I mean, I'm going to cover myself. Remember, nothing had died yet. This is pre. They have nothing. They've never seen anything die.
Yeah.
It's not like you or I, where we could go. I have a lot of hunter friends, and when they go out hunting, they call it harvesting. We were able to harvest an elk. Like, you mean kill?
Yeah.
But they call it harvesting because they're providing for their family and they're harvesting the crop of elk, and we have things to eat in that case, and so forth. So, but Adam and Eve had never seen anything die. It wasn't like they're familiar with this. So they obviously, if they see all these animals around them and they see a big, huge leafy tree, their thought would, let's just cover ourselves with that. But the Lord says, not good enough, right? We see in verse number 21 that you read, Jimmy, that it was God who covered them with the skins of animals. It was the coats of animals. Now, I'm sure folks can understand that animals don't voluntarily give you their skins. This is done by force. This is done by having to kill the animals. And think through this with me. It's not like God then he didn't go to the tanner. He didn't go to the leather shop and stretch out the skins and put oils on there, put a stain on there, and put it out in the sun. No, he killed them and he put it on them. What would that do? Well, that would result in the bloody residue of these animals to be on Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
This is the result of sin. Bloodiness. Hey, listen, here's the theming of beast. Satan is more subtle than any beast of the field. Sin tells me that I'm naked and need to be covered. And as a result of that, I'm covered with the blood of a beast. In other words, if you're going to act like a beast, you're going to look like a beast. Adam became beast-like because of his sin. He took on the blood of a beast and covered to cleanse his own blood. And now he's tainted with the blood of a beast to cover his own shame and nakedness. So very, very important theming there. There's kind of a long passage here in Daniel chapter 4. And Jimmy, I'll go ahead and read that if that's okay, because I'm going to make comments along the way. And it might be difficult for me I don't want to, interject while you're reading, if that's all right.
Okay.
It'll be maybe a little easier. So Daniel chapter 4, we're going to go in verses 19 through 37. So a little bit of a narrative here. And the reason this is important, Daniel 4, 19 through 37, is this is one of those amazing stories that we see in Daniel remember, there's a series of Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Nobody can interpret the dream. Daniel interprets the dream and so forth. Well, this is an important one because it has to do with our beast theming. We're going to start this one in 19. This is the story of Nebuchadnezzar having the dream about the tree. Remember the tree that reaches all the way to the heavens? This is that story. So very, very fascinating stories. Let's go ahead and read together. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished. That means that he was perplexed, astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. The tree which thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of heaven in their habitation. It is thou, O king. Thou art grown and become strong. For thy greatness is grown and reacheth unto the heaven, and thy dominion unto the end of the earth. And whereas the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven, and saying, Hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with the band of iron and brass and the tender grass in the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. So let's just kind of pause for a moment, understand what we're reading. So Daniel is saying that You, Nebuchadnezzar, you're this tree. You're like this tree that has gone all the way up to the heaven, and everybody benefits from your kingdom. Everybody benefits from this kingdom that you run in Babylon. Everybody has shelter and food from this. But then you notice that there's a holy one that comes down from heaven and commands that the tree is cut down, but to not take the root system out, just to take the tree down. The tree's going to fall over, but there's still a root system in the ground. So that's where we're at so far. Verse number 25. That they shall drive thee from men, thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree of the roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee. After that, thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. So, so what the prophecy here is of this interpretation, Daniel is saying, here's what's going to happen. When your kingdom is chopped down, when the tree comes down, you are going to see a loss of kingdom, and you're going to lose your mind. You are going to go out with the beasts of the field. You're going to get the dew on you just like the beasts of the field do. And you're going to not understand. And then 7 times the reminder is going to come to you. You're going to pass right over. You're not going to get it. But when you do finally come to your senses and you recognize that it is the God of heaven who has all authority over every kingdom, when you recognize that, then you will then again be able to recognize that it is God who has given you this ability to run this kingdom. Very odd relationship here that we're seeing with a Gentile king, really, and the God of Israel. So let's move on. Verse 27. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it be a lengthening of thy tranquility. And all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. Now let's pause for a moment. Daniel just warned Nebuchadnezzar. This is the warning. Your kingdom is going to come down because you're not acknowledging that God is in charge of all kings. You're going to lose your mind. You're going to live with the beast like the beasts of the field. And this is going to come upon you because you're not acknowledging who God is.
Well, I'll acknowledge him right now then. How's that?
That's how I would respond. That's exactly how I would respond. But here's what Nebuchadnezzar thought he would do. So all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar in verse 29, and at the end of 12 months, so 12 months go by, he walked into the palace of the kingdom of Babylon, took a deep breath and beat on his chest, and the king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? So, yeah, 12 months, and he, decided to ignore Daniel's interpretation of the dream and goes out on his palace balcony and looks around and says, "Look what I have done! I've done such a great and marvelous thing by the might of my own hand." Now it says here, verse 31, while the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling, important, shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou knowest that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will." The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird claws. Verse 34. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. In other words, I'm getting out of the beast-like state. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and the kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. None can stay his hand or say unto him, what doest thou? So Nebuchadnezzar's having a revival here. Verse 36. At the same time, my reasoning returned to me, and for my glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me. My counselors and my Lord sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom. An excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways in judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase or make low. Now, very interesting here, because Nebuchadnezzar, a Gentile king, is told by Daniel that if he doesn't acknowledge who God is in his kingdom, he's going to lose his kingdom and he's going to become like a beast, act like a beast. He does this, in fact, and we find that he's actually grunting around, rolling around, losing his mind. His nails are long, his hair is long, and he can't begin to reason, and he's living with the beast.
It always amazed me to think that, and this went on for 7 years, and nobody in his kingdom thought to maybe put him away or end his life or anything. They just let him roam around in this field for 7 years.
It's an amazing story. He comes to his senses then, and of course he reasons and acknowledges that the Lord is who he is, and his reasoning comes back to him, and he gains back his former kingdom and splendor. Now, this is kind of interesting. I won't get into this in this passage, but Solomon is about the opposite of this. Solomon is the lamb-like figure who turns into a beast.
Yeah.
So Solomon, actually, that's interestingly, even his name, the root of his name means peace, shalom, Solomon. And so he starts off as a lamb, and then he turns into a beast. Where here, Nebuchadnezzar is a beast-like figure who then turns into more like a lamb kind of figure. So they kind of swap places with the Gentile role, and the Jewish role is very, very interesting here.
Did Nebuchadnezzar end his days on the good side?
It appears to be in chapter 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems like the man got saved from, the terminology we would use.
Yeah.
So that's so we can summarize beast like this. Beast is somebody in authority, usually always in authority. So, of course, Adam, our federal head, we call him. Somebody in authority who should recognize Jesus, or should recognize the Lord as in charge of everything. They're warned about it, and they turn their back and they reject God. We see that in Adam and Eve. We see that in Nebuchadnezzar. And they take on characteristics of Satan. Then they are referred to as a beast. Okay. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit more in the book of Daniel when we get into our text. But let's go to our last metaphor. Our last metaphor here is going to be a sea monster, which a lot of people don't realize a sea monster is a part of our text in the book of Genesis. But a sea monster is definitely part of our text. Now, another way that we can say sea monster is we could say the phrase beast, a sea beast, sometimes it's called, or another terminology we use is a serpent, that with the emphasis on it being in the water. So sea monster, beast, serpent, all of these, this terminology is used in the Bible, and I'll show you right here. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 21.
And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good.
So the word here, whales, does not mean Shamu. It is not talking about an orca. That's not what this word means. And so if you go ahead, and I encourage people to do this, but I'll just tell you what it is. It's the Hebrew word tannin. And this word has to do, even if you look at Blue Letter Bible, I looked at it just before we did this, just for simplicity. It says at the very top of that this word tannin means dragon, it means serpent, it means sea monster. And so this is in the deep that God created. He also created creatures to represent the terrifying aspects of the abyss. And these sea monsters, whatever they were, are not like, well, like I said, not like a beautiful Shamu kind of thing. This, whatever this is a sea monster. The Bible refers to this over and over again. This is what's being referred to in Job as Leviathan. So Leviathan is the sea version of the sea monster. And then later in Revelation 13, we're going to get into the behemoth idea, which is more like a land dwelling monster. So really, Revelation 13, I know in David Chilton's book, he even entitles this chapter Leviathan and Behemoth, because it's carrying over the theming of the sea monster, which is Leviathan, and then the land monster or beast, which is the behemoth. So you have both of those in Revelation 13. But it's very important to understand that this word whales, that's translated whales, I encourage people, do a little digging on that, do a little word study on that. You'll find this is not talking about your average, blue whale or something. Okay.
And I saw the video you did this past week on walking through Blue Letter Bible. So if anybody doesn't know how to use it, go to Ken's YouTube channel, it's just Bible for Family, right?
Yep.
And go watch that video. It was very helpful. And
yeah,
I know how to use it, but I still found value because there was a couple other things that I didn't know. So yeah, thank you for that video.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Blue Letter Bible is a good resource. And then I think your preface is eSword, though, isn't it? I believe.
I use eSword, but
yes, so we'll do that one next time.
Okay. Yeah, but
they're both good resources. Free. Yeah. That's the best part. Free is right in my budget.
Yeah, exactly. I like eSword because of there's a lot of resources out there that you can add into it. A lot of different commentaries, a lot of different lexicons and dictionaries and things like that. So
absolutely. So we've gone over 4 metaphors that will help us for Revelation 13. And so we've gone over the sand, the sea or the deep. We've gone over the beast in general, and then we've gone over a sea monster. And it kind of feels like we're saying, fantasy stuff, but that's literally what it is. And now that we have that kind of knowledge and the metaphors here, now the chapter will be pretty easy. We'll just say pretty easy. It'll still be fun. It's complex in the sense that it has a lot of details, but it's not. It doesn't mean it's intellectually difficult or anything. It's very simple actually, but it's complex in the sense that there's a lot of details to it. So,
if you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and check out the full episode by clicking the link below.